Talking about leaks today, and you don't ever. What was it, Dave? Show me that noise you said a couple weeks ago. I said, Dave, how do you show me a noise? Well, how do you hear a leak?
I don't know.
You can't hear. Well, maybe if it's drip, 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 you hear the faucet. It keeps you up all night. But we're talking about your car. And I kind of have a funny story. I'm going to pick on my friend Colette today because she brought her car in to have us work on it this week. She didn't say anything about that noise, but her power steering fluid was 3/4 of a quart low on fluid. And it gets even funnier because I didn't say anything to her about it either. I just called her and talked about some of the other stuff, and she said, is there something wrong with my power steering? I said, well, there is. Then there's laughter.
Right.
What do you mean? How do I know? So, well, that noise it was making. So it was low on fluid. So many times you cannot, the shop calls you and tells you have a fluid leak. I don't believe it. I don't see any drips on the ground. Well, that's what she thought too. There's nothing on my ground mat. What are you talking about? I know I had that noise. So it ended up being 3/4 of a quart low. And so I start to then question what my technician said. The power steering pump is leaking. Well, I know it's leaking. The fluid just didn't evaporate.
I don't know. Maybe it was service and somebody left it low.
Well, how to get low to leave it low in the first place?
I don't know.
It leaked. So I go out there, trying to be the hero, help her out, save her some money. Go out there, get on a knee, look underneath. There's no fluid leaks under here. Everything's dry. What are you talking about? So I call Colette and I said, Colette, you've got to have fluid on the ground. You've got to. No, there's nothing where I park my car. So, okay. So we're not going to do anything with the power steering. We'll put some conditioner in there. Maybe it'll help slow the leak a little bit. Technician starts working on the car going, this power steering pump's leaking everywhere.
He's lying to you.
I didn't even see a leak. It's leaking. So I called Colette before the show today. I said, well, I won't tell you exactly what I said, but go outside and go look where you park and tell me, are you seeing anything? And as she's walking out the door, well, maybe a quarter size, maybe. Well, that quarter grew to a 5-inch diameter leak that she never had. It didn't know anything about. So it can be confusing, makes you question.
You did pretty good.
Now,
that wasn't bad.
Okay, so you got it to work, and my impression was pretty good.
It was pretty good.
And I love making customers do that on the counter. That's fun. Could you make that noise for me?
Well, that's a classic sound of a power steering pump being low on fluid. So when you hear that, when you turn the wheel to the left or to the right, you've got a leak. Power steerings don't use power steering fluid. They don't burn it like an engine could use oil or burn oil up in the combustion chamber.
If it's gone, it's leaked.
If it's making that noise, it has leaked out. And that brings me to my next point, is that when I take my car in the shop, I'm getting an oil change, they come back and they say this is leaking and that's leaking, and people don't know what the heck to do with all these leaks. Do I need to really spend all this money to fix all these leaks on my car? And sometimes maybe they get the feeling they're being a little overzealous at recommending me something because they're telling me about all these leaks. I haven't seen anything in my driveway.
It's because you don't pay attention usually.
Well, that's true.
But going back to does the power steering fluid get consumed? I would say you probably lose a little bit. I mean, GM had a transfer case problem. You don't consume transfer cases, but didn't some of the transfer cases have a problem with the fluid evaporating?
No, the fluid didn't evaporate, but there was a pinhole that developed in the transfer case, and it's such a small and slight leak, no one ever sees it, and someone literally the fluid will leak out over 6 months. It only holds 2 quarts, so it's nothing dramatic on the ground. You're not going to see a big puddle. Something happens, and it doesn't. It goes on, and then by the end of 6 months, transfer case is burned up. Now you're talking about a $1,500, $2,000 repair, but it's a leak that no one ever sees, and even technicians miss it on a regular basis because it's pinhole.
It's so small, and that's where we get to the question: what's the severity of the leak? And so, is it sweating a little bit? I know you use a scale.
Scale
Tri-City Transmission. It's don't just come to me and say it's leaking. You need to quantify that leak. Is it sweating all the way up to an active drip?
Yes. See, we got a scale of 1 to 5. 1 and 2. 1 is perfect. There's really nothing wrong. 2, it's leaking, but it hasn't hit the ground yet, and I think that's key. In other words, and I know some stuff doesn't hit the ground because it gets caught by something else, but is it actually dripping and hitting the ground?
Joke about old Mercedes. When they start leaking oil, you just put a new foam pad underneath on the windage tray because that would absorb all the leaks. People say, I've never had any leaks. Well, yeah, they've just been being captured by this pan that is really a windshield and a debris shield, not a capture for oil.
So you're never going to see it on the ground. And it has some sound type stuff, foam and stuff in there that
absorbs the oil. And
never see it on the ground. But, so one of the ways I tell people, let's say we do see a leak or a leak starting to develop, let's say it's a 2 on the scale of 1 to 5 of severity. Well, it's not really dripping and hitting the ground yet, but let's monitor it. So if you're back in the shop in 3,000 miles or 5,000 miles, remember to readdress that leak and make sure it hasn't got any worse. But it's not something that you got to run out and fix right away.
Well, but then the severity of the leak can also be determined on what's the fluid capacity of the unit or whatever it is that's leaking.
Well, back to the GM transfer case, you said there was evaporating oil, and oil doesn't evaporate. I've just never seen it happen.
Right.
But it only holds 2 quarts, maybe 2.5 quarts. It's a very non-severe leak, and most people don't even spot it.
So a 3, which is maybe just it's forming a drip or 2. A 3 on a transfer case or a power steering unit that only holds a quart or a quart and a half is a little bit more severe than a 3
on an
engine that maybe holds 9 quarts of oil,
right,
on some cars, or even 5 for that matter. So it depends on what is leaking also as to determine the severity or the severity of the leak or the necessity to get that service performed or the leak repaired right away.
Who do we got up first this segment?
I think we're going to go with Max on some kind of Yukon. Max, what can we help you with on your Yukon? You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Well, I've got an issue with the NOx sensor. I've had some trouble codes read on it. I went through the trouble, pulled the whole intake off, replaced both NOx sensors, which was really a pain, and put them back in, and shortly after ended up having the code come back. And now I'm concerned because obviously I've replaced both of them and I'm still getting the code. I was wondering if there's anything that might set that off otherwise, or if there's another code, or if there's something I should be looking for.
Well, is it pinging or knocking? Are you having any symptoms?
No, it runs real smooth, actually.
Okay.
But it's coming up on my engine light, and I'm getting ready to try to pass emissions.
Ooh, okay. And what year is your Yukon?
2000.
2000. Well, I know on a lot of those Yukons, in that same Chevrolet or GMC engine in that era had problems with the NOx sensor connector getting corroded. A lot of people would steam clean or wash their engine a lot, and the way that design is, the water would go down and corrode the connectors, and you go in and replace the sensor possibly, and it doesn't fix it. So you need to trace that connector back a ways. But maybe before that, we really need to get a true diagnostic done. I don't know if you did a test. You know what testing you did?
A shop to have it diagnosed, and basically they led it up to that point. I'm wondering, those connectors are pretty brittle. It possibly could be the connector.
Yeah, you need to get back in there. I know it's no fun, but at least that intake manifold is not too terrible to take off. There's no coolant or anything in that one. It's dry. So you really need to be looking at the connections. You know, take them apart, use a pocket screwdriver or some kind of small file and really scratch them up and make sure there's good metal on metal. And then short of that, if it's putting a NOx sensor code in there, you have to read the description of the code. What parameters or what criteria needs to be met to make that come on. I've seen NOx sensor codes be set for an engine rod knock problem, a bearing failure. But that's not the NOx sensor is not there to do that.
When it's running too rich, that's when it kicks in.
No, it should be for pinging.
I'm sorry, when too lean.
The pinging. So, and that could be caused by a EGR valve that's not working right. A number of different things. So not always is it the sensor, or not always is it bad gas, but the computer is wanting to control the timing. So it's listening, it hears this noise, and takes over control of the timing. So it could be, you could have a mechanical failure even.
Let's go with Andy in Chandler on a Ford F-150. Go ahead, Andy. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Hi, thanks. One of my kids was driving my Super Crew last night, and as she was driving, she noticed the temperature gauge spike all the way up, and then the low oil light was flashing, so she pulled over, turned it off. I went to go check it out. I noticed I couldn't tell if it was oil or whatnot all over, I'm going to say, the manifold. And when I checked the dipstick, I could barely get oil on it. And then when I checked the coolant reservoir, it was completely bone dry. So I went down, put a jug of water in it, put a couple quarts of oil on it, and as I was driving home, it was fine. And then later that night, another kid came home and noticed there was a big old pile underneath the truck, a puddle.
Puddle of oil, or did you get some coolant underneath the car as well, or water?
I don't think it was oil.
Okay.
So I'm just concerned, should I prepare for the worst when I take it into the shop, or?
Well, I mean, you should always be prepared for the worst, I guess. Hate to say it, but that's weird that you're low on coolant and then a low oil pressure and then the gauge instantly shooting up. Initially, I thought there might be a problem, with the
intake leaking.
Well, no, with just a common denominator. The oil light, all of a sudden you get a temperature gauge that just instantly goes hot and then goes cool again. The engine can't heat and cool that fast, so it's usually an electrical issue. But in this case, we have low coolant and low oil and a mess everywhere. So that's something I think we need to get into a shop. You're going to need to get that in. Start off, they're going to want to get the cooling system filled, get the oil cleaned up, get the oil filled, run it and see if there's any obvious leaks. And then we're going to want to pressure test the cooling system, get it up to 16 or 18 pounds of pressure, and find out where that coolant's going. Thanks so much for the call, Andy. Let's go with Phyllis in Cave Creek. It looks like a 2000 Impala. Go ahead, Phyllis. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my call.
Well, thank you for calling.
I listen to you a lot. I've learned a lot from both of you.
Good.
But anyway, thank you. I took my car last week to a car company, the car company on Scottsdale Road in Thomas that you recommended.
Great.
And they were good, but very pricey.
And you make the comment about pricey. Pricey's all, I don't know what they did. We have no idea.
It's all relative.
It's all, you get what you pay for, especially in the automotive business. And Dave, you have a great analogy about, I might charge $10, an example. I charge $10 for something. You're getting $8 worth of product in that $10. The next guy, he's cheaper. He charges $6.
But you're only getting $3 worth of product.
You're getting $3 worth of product.
I wasn't going to let him totally steal my thunder on my line.
Yeah. So, remember, there's a lot of things to take into consideration when you're talking about car repair. And price is one of them for sure. But you've really got to make sure you're making an apples-to-apples comparison. Warranty.
Right.
Certified technicians. Jim at the car repair company, they've been there 32 years, I think, since 1981 or 82. Somewhere, my math is a little fuzzy this morning, but that's quality shop.
Well, when I call to tell somebody that they need a transmission for their vehicle, and I tell them the price, and let's just say I'm going to use $2,500 as a number, they say, "Wow, that's expensive," and I agree with them. Absolutely, it is expensive. But one of the things I say is, that truck when you bought it new cost $35,000. It's made up of two major components. One is the engine, and one is the transmission. When you consider that, what should a transmission cost? And it's relative. You can repair a transmission certainly for less than that. But if you're going and you're going to do a complete overhaul on a transmission, it's going to be expensive. But as compared to what? Yeah. That's the way I look at it.
There's a difference between expensive and a lot of money. Sometimes they're the same thing, and sometimes they're not.
Well, the one thing that we can tell you guys as consumers for auto repair when we're talking about leaks, back to our conversation, is that when you go into a shop, and let's say you're getting an oil change and they come back to you and they say, hey, the radiator's leaking, or the valve cover's leaking oil, or the transfer case is leaking, what kind of questions you need to be asking to verify how severe is that leak and how soon do I need to take care of it? And people are afraid to ask questions like that. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Just say, hey, let's say they come to you and say the valve cover's leaking. And you say, okay, great. The first question you can ask was, when we went to change my engine oil, was the oil low? If it's a 4-quart system, let's say in a Honda, and you haven't got an oil change in 3,000 miles, well, it may only be low by just a bit. So,
thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
My neighbors have a 2000 Chevy Impala, and they're on Social Security. They're in their 80s, and they had a radiator leak and put some stuff in, like a Band-Aid, to just kind of heal it, but that's not going to last too long. And I was wondering if we ordered them a radiator from O'Reilly's or something, could we get it installed, or is it just better to take it somewhere and let them do it and have it installed?
It's always better. This is quite a loaded question. There's a lot of answers here. So the first one we'll go to is the stop leak. Phyllis and I talked a little bit during the break, and they have a radiator leak, and they put some stop leak in it and want to know if that was okay. And that is a temporary, it's not a fix, and it's not healing it, that's for sure.
It's going to get you off the side of the road if you need something like that.
It might get you to the next stop, might get you to the next oil change. I mean, I had an old 280Z I used to drive back and forth to Pasadena for school, and it was losing, the radiator was leaking on the way over the hill there in California. I put a jar of pepper in it. It'll plug up the leak. But the problem with those stop leaks is it will plug up the radiator possibly too and make your problem even worse. So you've got to be careful with those.
Well, in this question, they want to save money because they're fixed income, probably limited driving. I don't see a lot of 80-year-olds going out there and just blazing and driving, cross country or anything like that. So
my mom does.
Does she? So I I don't want to not fix it right, because if we can't afford to fix it right the first time, we're not going to be able to fix it right the second time. And I don't want to see a vehicle overheat and wreck the engine. Well, now we took a $400 or $500 repair, and now it's a $1,500 repair.
Yeah. Well, and so there's two things. It needs to go to a professional and get an opinion, because one of Phyllis's questions off the air was, how long can we go? Can it go? And we just simply can't answer that question over the radio. A professional needs to look at this and take into consideration how severe is that radiator leaking, where is the leak, what's the condition of the rest of the cooling system, and what are they using the car for? And then they could probably guide you through stretching that repair a little bit. But I always, we get those phone calls sometime, will you use my parts? And I always tell the people, well, come on down, bring your parts, and bring some eggs and some bacon, and then we'll go to Coco's. And after they make us breakfast with your eggs and bacon, then I'll come back and put your radiator in. It doesn't work like that. And part of the reason is we're responsible for that repair. So if I put your radiator in and it's leaking, now what?
I don't like it because it's a separation of responsibility. And
exactly.
So when there's a problem, who does what? And we didn't have the money to spend the first time. Now there's an issue. Now it just doesn't go well.
Or what if we've got the wrong part? So we get it in, we get the radiator out, the car's apart, it's on the rack, and your radiator is wrong. And you don't have the money, and now we're scrambling. We're trying to. You don't have a car anymore because your car's here, so you can't go pick up a radiator. Now we have this whole mess on our hands. So that's one of the main reasons most shops typically will not install customer parts, and people think it's greed and you want to make money on the parts, and that's certainly part of the business model. But That's not what it's all about. I'm going to be married to that repair. I want to be married to Beauty Queen.
A complete repair. So, hey, Phyllis, I really appreciate the call. I think a lot of people could relate to that and wonder about the customer part installation thing. So let's go with, looks like Carlo in Phoenix with a 2008 Dodge Challenger. Go ahead, Carlo. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Hey, enjoy your show every Saturday. I love it.
Thank you.
I had did some work to my motor. I kind of changed the cam in it, upgraded the heads. Car's running great. The only problem I'm having is the air condition. I can't put it to recycle, or when I go to turn it to make it go out of the vents and out of the froster, it's not, switching over. Is there a code for that, or because I know there's no vacuum lines, it's all electrical, isn't it?
Yeah, 2008 is going to be all electrical, and more than likely we've got some sort of a mode door not working.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And he asked, is there a code for that? Yeah, there very well could be in the air conditioning control module if it has one, or a body control module. There could be a code stored in there that's going to help us go to where we need to start looking at this repair. But that's not going to be the type of code that turns on a check engine light or any fault indicator on the dash. It could make the air conditioning display flash. Sometimes they'll do that. Just like a transmission failure, sometimes the park reverse neutral light starts to flash. That's your indicator. So there may be a code, there may not be.
Yeah, and one of the things when you're in a vehicle, there's several different modules. You mentioned a body control module. That's going to control things like windows and door locks and stuff like that. That stuff does not turn on check engine lights. It doesn't mean we can't talk to it. So when we get in our scanner, we plug into the vehicle, we actually dial up the body control module, or we dial up the transmission control module. There's even a transfer case control module for these four-wheel drives. But there's so many modules in these cars. But yes, you're right. It won't turn on the check engine light, and he's not going to see it.
There's an amazing amount of computing power in a modern vehicle.
Thanks so much for the call, Carlo. Let's go with, looks like Neil's been waiting the longest on a 2006 Mustang GT. Go ahead, Neil. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Hi, guys.
Hey, how you doing?
Great show.
Thank you.
Love to listen to it on Saturdays here, piddling around in the garage. All right, I'm one of those poor saps that's got a problem now.
And you're piddling with your hot rod Mustang, huh?
No, it's my wife.
Okay.
It's my wife's car.
You better do it right.
It has been an awesome car. It has had zero problems. But I've got something going on that I'm just a little bit baffled on. It has a tick under 60,000 miles. And I've only been in the car about 3 times, but I noticed, I'm going to say close to a year ago, that there was some sound coming out of the rear end. Rear being somewhere in the rear drive area. And the tires were getting, kind of on the close to shot stage back then. And I thought it was probably, how tires, they get worn out, they start giving you some of that harmonic type sound. Well, it's a year later. I just got tires on it today, brand new tires, and I'm driving away, and I've still got this same sound. And the sound is, it's hard to describe. It's not a thumping, it's not a knocking, it's not anything like that. It's more of a harmonic type sound that goes strictly with the rotation of the rear end. If you push the clutch in and coast, the sound is still there. As you come down and decel to a stop, it winds down till it stops. It kicks in at about 20 miles an hour. You start hearing this.
Dave's over here nodding his head, just chomping. He wants to tell you what's going on already.
Well, let me tell you what I've done.
Okay.
I've got the car jacked up, and I was looking underneath the rear end, and it's got a different style U-joint than I'm used to of normal vehicles. It's kind of all enclosed. And I was about ready to check the fluid. There's no evidence of any leaks or anything like that. So if someone knows what... I'm scared it's going to be expensive, but I'm hoping it's not.
Dave's ready for you.
Okay, let me hear it.
If you would have brought this to my shop, first thing I would go drive the car, and I would look for that noise, and I would see, is it consistent with road speed? The faster I go, the louder the noise, or is it consistent with engine speed or transmission speed? Well, you told us the answer to that. It's consistent with road speed.
That was all the perfect answers to bring to the service counter to tell your service advisor. That I will tell you that right now. You've done and helped us shortcut to where we just need to go verify what you said. But
I would go road test it, verify that. The next thing I would do was either use our wireless chassis ears, which we have, which are wireless microphones that we plug onto the differential, because I'm thinking we've got differential bearings that are making noise. 06 Mustang, I think that one's independent rear suspension. So you've got 2 hub bearings out at the wheels. Those can be making noise. That's a place where I would put those microphones. One there, one on the left wheel, one on the right wheel, and then a couple on the differentials, the pinion bearing and the carrier bearings. And I would, we put on a headset and go listen to it. The other way you can do it at your house if you want. If you had this car up on jack stands very securely, and I don't want to give you bad advice because this is not very safe, but you can actually get under there, listen with a stethoscope, put it right on the differential and run those wheels. And you're going to find I'm not worried about the U-joints at all. Not at 60,000 miles, and U-joints aren't going to make that type of noise. So more than likely we got a carrier bearing or a pinion bearing going bad in that differential.
And that's something that might be covered under a longer powertrain warranty, although that car was a
06 60,000.
660. You might look at the warranty on that, but again, bumper-to-bumper radio for a great shop. Tri-City Transmission, of course, is our Dave and our transmission expert and do the rear end work, as well do a lot of the bumper-to-bumper shops. So anywhere you are, I'm sure anybody on there can take care of you.
For sure. So speaking of leaks, and people always call me and they always ask me this question, and I thought you probably know the answer. Can I put a little bit of brake fluid in my transmission to stop a leak so it quits leaking? Fact or fiction?
Well, fact. If you want to ruin your transmission.
Yeah.
The brake fluid in the brake fluid in whatever fluid is the sleazeball used car sales trick. You put a tablespoon in the engine oil, and what's happening there? That brake fluid goes and attacks the rubber seals. So it'll take a rubber seal the size of your pinky
and swell it.
It's bigger than your big toe, and it's got this, swelling up, and that might be good in some cases. Might slow the leak down a little bit. But you can absolutely destroy a transmission.
It's a used car lot trick or something you might do on the side of the road if you're really in a jam, but no, you're going to have more transmission work when you get back.
Yeah.
And the reason I don't like that idea is you can take a perfectly good transmission with a minor leak and cost yourself a whole lot more money. Well, let's go with David in Mesa on a 2001 Saturn. Go ahead, David. You are on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Hi, I was just calling in because I was driving my Saturn yesterday, and it started sputtering while driving on the freeway, I pulled over off the side of the road, and the check engine light starts flashing on me, and I can start it up, but the engine shakes a lot, and I can't drive it because it'll just stall out. So just wondering how bad do you guys think my car is destroyed?
Well, I wouldn't call it destroyed, David. I think you're all right. But that brings up a good topic, David, Riccio. The check engine light. When do I need to go in because my check engine light came on? Now, sometimes your check engine light's on because your gas cap is loose. That's not as common as it used to be. Most people are tuned into that now.
Well, specifically, he said it flashed.
Flashing is bad news.
Anytime there's a significant misfire, it's going to flash the check engine light.
And you say, why? Well, let me back that up. David said, is my car destroyed? And I just said, it's bad news, and I've scared him. That doesn't mean expensive.
It could be as simple as a plug wire that broke down and the thing's misfiring, or an injector or something like that.
A spark plug, easy. But the reason the manufacturer makes that light flash is because when you have a misfire, you're pumping partially burned or raw fuel through the engine and out the exhaust. But when it's going out the exhaust, it's going through the catalytic converter. And that raw fuel will kill the the converter. So it can cause fire. I mean, in an extreme case, you start loading that converter up with fuel.
It's hot.
It's burning it in the converter. It's converting it, and that thing is roasting red hot.
Well, 2000 Saturn, this wouldn't happen, but on real late model vehicles, they'll shut off the injector to that cylinder that's misfiring. They'll say, hey, number 3 is misbehaving, cut it loose. We're not feeding it with any more fuel.
Mercedes just shuts the car down. They'll put it in limp mode. You can't go 30 miles an hour from just one cylinder misfiring, but they're really trying to protect that converter. And part of the reason, they've got to give it an 8-year, 80,000-mile warranty, federal law. So,
well, thanks so much for the call, David. Let's go with John in Phoenix on a 2005 Ford Freestyle.
Hey, guys. Thanks for taking my call.
You bet.
Problem I'm having is I had the AC replaced front and rear compressors, and the AC in the rear is still working great, but the blower in the front is not blowing any air at all now.
Okay.
So it started out it would just kind of off and on. It would be air, and then there wouldn't be air. And now there's nothing.
Okay, so I want to go ahead, Dave.
When you had the repair done, was it specifically, you said compressors were done. Did they do any blower motor work?
No.
And when you took it in there, it was because the air wasn't blowing cold, or was it because it wasn't flowing out?
It wasn't blowing cold.
It wasn't blowing cold. So they're two different, sounds like the same repair, but two different problems.
Yeah, same system. We've got the air conditioning system, and one thing that's interesting, and I want to dispel a thought, or not a rumor, so to speak, but a misconception about air conditioning. You have front and rear air conditioning, and you said you had compressors replaced. It's just one compressor for the whole air conditioning system. And then you have a blower in the front and a blower in the rear, and then you've got an evaporator in the front and an evaporator in the rear. So it sounds like the compressor in the air conditioning part that produces the cold air, it sounds like all that is working fine. You've got a blower motor issue or a control issue, maybe a switch, maybe a resistor, maybe a blower motor. So while your air conditioning is not working, it sounds like it is a different repair, and somebody just needs to go in. Probably the shop that did the air conditioning is perfectly capable of going in, determining what's wrong with the blower motor operation and fixing that. Not a big deal.
Well, thanks so much for the call, John. We're going to squeeze in Tom on a 2001 Dodge Truck. Go ahead, Tom. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. That gentleman that just was on about the air conditioning, I have similar. When my truck is sitting, I have cold air blowing, but then when I start moving, going forward with my truck, there's like that vent shuts off, and then I just get hot air.
Does it come out? Does it sound like it's coming out up by the windshield?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
So does it change where the air is? So you've said two different things. It blows hot air. So does it stop blowing cold air?
Yeah, it stops blowing cold air. Only when I'm sitting still at a red light or something, then I get cold air, because it opens that vent or whatever. But then it seems like it is a vent, and then it shuts off, and then.
Okay. I drove a 2001 Dodge for a couple years, and forever, man, I fought vacuum problems with that truck. And, it'd be great, but as soon as you gave it any gas because you were jumping on the freeway or accelerating from a stoplight, well, the fan would quit blowing out of the vent and go up to the up to the window or the. So I think maybe that's what he's referring to, because
that was
generally
a little confusing. Those comments were kind of mixing a little bit.
Generally, if it's like a compressor issue, it's going to blow hot when you're stopped, and as soon as you get moving down the road where you get some more airflow across the condenser, then it's going to cool down. So kind of exactly the opposite.
Yeah, his
so it didn't
symptoms.
quite fit.
The symptoms are a little bit backwards, but yeah, difficult one. But Tom, if the Dodge trucks have a problem with the mode door or the blend door, which is controlled by a motor or sometimes on a cable if it's a manual system, and the hinge on those breaks. And you'll get air conditioning that works, but it's not really great. And then you go get another Dodge truck and you get frozen out of it. So if you Google Dodge truck air conditioning vent problem, you're going to find all kinds of videos on there. People make their little YouTube videos. I know there's one where you can pull the blower motor out and reach in there and check that door. So that's always a good a good resource to go see if you want to try and tackle it yourself. And Hank and Nick or Holden, we're going to grab you off the air if you want to hang on. We always take every single call.